Unscripted with Marilyn Morales. Today, my special co host is Jacinda Naharo. Hello, Jacinda.
Hey, how are you?
So, I know this is your first time on a show like this. Share with my viewers who you are, what you do, a little bit about you.
Yes, so hi guys. Thank you so much again for having me. My name is Jacinda Naharo, and right now, currently, I do work as a full-time staff member in a Christian church located in New York City, and I also serve and personally in ministry in my own local church here in Yonkers, in my hometown. So I'm very active in the Christian ministry world, and so yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for co hosting with me today.
Sure.
So, our guest today is someone that I got to meet in person last weekend. A wonderful, wonderful man, became my husband's best friend, my son's, favorite singer at this time, and his name is Jared Miller. Let me tell you a little bit about Jared. So, singer songwriter and now best selling author Jared Miller has been passionately leading for over 25 years. Born in Houston, Texas, Jared has been involved in music all of his life, singing at conferences since the age of 8 years old. He has written and co produced 9 albums, from rock bands to solo and church worship projects. Jared has played with the likes of Jars of Clay, DC Talk, Skillet, and Ricardo Sanchez. Truth is his newest song, inspired by his book, Truth, the Lies We've Been Told. Jared is proud of all his accomplishments, Truth in and out of the studio, but he could tell you that this project is his most inspired. Let's welcome Jared to the show. Hello.
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 How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here today.
Yeah, listen, I'm very, very excited to have you here today. I purposefully did not ask you a lot of questions when I met you in person last weekend, knowing that we had this coming up, because I want to hear it with everybody else. I want to hear your story.
Yeah.
So, as I shared with you, what we want to hear on this show is about Jared the person, right? So, before you became singer, songwriter, and I see that you've been doing this since you're 8 years old, right? but but nobody goes through life without challenges. So if you can share with my viewers a challenge that you had before you became the person that you are today and how you overcame that challenge.
Sure. I'm a little bummed that Sal's not with us today, but that's okay. I'll get over it. So
He wanted to
honored
be
to
here.
be
He
here.
wanted to.
No, I believe it. So my upbringing was pretty simple. Faith was a huge part of my upbringing. Our local church. Um, so some people will relate, some won't, but we had Sunday morning service, Sunday night service, Wednesday night. We would have revival services. So when people were doing baseball tournaments and basketball tournaments, I'm at church. That was a huge part of our family culture. And so life would seem safe and simple for the most part growing up. I wouldn't say I had my real first challenge of my faith. My foundation didn't feel like it was shaken until I was about 20 years old. Um, I'm 2 years out of high school, 1 year in college, 1 year working full time. The third year, I'm at a Bible college. I'm an intern for a ministry for 6 months, an hour and a half away from where my family lives. And I get a call that my dad's in ICU. So while all of this is going on, I moved from an apartment to a home opener. There was a family at the church who opened up their home to allow me to stay there to save some money. The first night that I stayed there, the next morning, my cousin is banging on the door saying, "We got to get to the hospital now." I said, "Do I have time to shower?" He's, "No, we got to leave like now." We drive to Houston, an hour and a half where my family lives. And I get to the front of the hospital, and one of my dad's best friends is like, his eyes are bloodshot red. He's crying. And me, I'm 20 years old at the time. I wasn't getting it. I wasn't computing. Like I knew something was wrong, but to fathom that the ultimate fear had happened, I
Oh,
wasn't
wow.
I wasn't I wasn't computing that. So what would be obvious to some was not obvious to me when I saw my dad's best friend crying and bloodshot eyes. He said, "Hey, follow me." We go up the elevator. Remember, my cousin was the one who came and got me that morning to go to the hospital. We go to the ICU room where my dad is supposed to be. He's not there. I turn around to like the desk area where one of the clerks were, and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for my father. What's his name? Who are you?" I told her who I am. She's looking on the computer, and she looks at me and she says, "Oh, it shows here that he's deceased."
Oh my God.
That's that's how I found out that my dad had passed.
Oh
It's
my
horrible.
God.
It was almost like they were so businesslike about it. Like it was just, oh, it just shows here on the computer. Like no thought of the magnitude.
Of what she's telling you.
Right.
Did anybody else in your family know? Or did they find out at the same time you did?
They found out before me. So so the same gentleman who met us at the front of the hospital who was crying, he said, "Hey," he brought us to ICU. We found out what happened. He said, "Follow me." We go up the elevator. We go down this hallway. And what I didn't tell you was that my dad was a trustee at our church.
Mm.
So he was like a deacon. He was one of the main members of the leadership of the church. And all of the trustees are surrounding my mom. And so I walk what felt like a mile down from the elevator to her, and she says, "Do you know what has happened?" And I said, "I think so." And then I collapsed. I didn't faint, but I collapsed in her arms. And
Right.
so it's like I'm doing the Lord's work. I have a path in my life. The unfathomable happened, and now I'm trying to process. I'm 20. My mom is her age. My sister's 12, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck just happened.
Right.
Yeah, and so for the first time in my life, you're in shock, you're in denial. It wasn't like I was questioning God in that first few moments, but I think the whys kick in a few days later. Why?
Right.
Why? You can't make sense of it. You're confused. You're trying to do the best you can. You think you're doing all the things right, and then this happens, and the biggest turning point for me, which is probably the hardest lesson for most people, was to literally surrender. Like, as long as I was trying to figure it out, as long as I was trying to ask the why, there's a scripture that says, lean not into your own understanding, but
Mm-hmm.
trust in the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so I think we can read a scripture, or we can hear an encouragement, or someone can try to help us and bring solace. But until you really release that, the need for control, the need for the answer, the need for, I want to know why. I had to take my fist and I had to turn it into a hand.
Mm.
So instead of doing this, like, why God? Okay, my hands are open to receive what I don't understand. And
Right.
so that was like the biggest thing is letting go and surrendering. Because if I wouldn't have done that, if I would have held on to the anger, if I would have held on to the hurt, if I would have held on to the questioning, it would have created an emotional cancer within me. And I had to let it go. It's the only way that I was able to heal from that process.
That's right. And Jared, some of my story as well,
Yeah.
right? So losing my child, and I also lost my mother just a few short years ago in 2020. And it is human to ask why. right? We all are going to ask why. I think our first instinct is to ask why. And to get from why this happened to acceptance that this has happened, right? And that there's nothing that we can do, regardless of the answers, to change what has happened, that has happened. Acceptance is the first part of healing, of moving forward. And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's exactly where you were. You had to accept what had happened and move forward from there, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and something that I didn't mention earlier is that so my dad owned his own business when he was living, but before he owned his own business, my mother and my father, they actually met at Bible college, and so his initial pursuit was to be an evangelist or a pastor or like full-time ministry. Well, like in the 70s and early 80s, he was trying to pursue that, and it wasn't putting food on the table. So he took a different direction, and he was successful in that different direction. The cool thing is, and I say this with respect and love and humility, is that I'm able to do now what he wasn't able to do.
I actually was going to take you to that next, right? It's, yeah, it looks like you found purpose, right? And because of his example, because now that's what you do, right?
Right.
So take us to that. What led you to that next step to say, okay, this is what I want to do now. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Did you already know that at the point when you were going to this Bible college, or did this come after losing your father?
The simplest way that I can describe it is that God got a hold of my heart at a very young age. I was 6 when I received salvation, was baptized, and so without getting into a lot of details, the church culture that I grew up in was very expressive and very very exciting, and there was never a dull moment. And the reason why I
Mm-hmm.
even mention that is because there were some people who translated that church culture as emotionalism.
Hmm.
But for me, it was real. It wasn't just like hype and outward expression and loud singing and loud praying and all these things. Like to me, there was a true transformation at a young age, at a tender age. And so I always knew that God had something for me. I did know that I found the love to sing 6, 7, 8 years old. And so going to Bible college, I was trying to figure it out. But my dad was always heavily involved in ministry. My mom was always involved in ministry. And so that was just part of my DNA. If you would have asked me when I was 14 to 18, I would have told you I was going to play in a rock band. I didn't know. But from my late teens to my early 20s to my mid 20s, that shifted into, hey, I really want to get planted in a local church and really spend the rest of my life serving people. And so part of my personality comes from my dad. He was a people person. He loved people. People were attracted to him. He had a great smile. People loved to be around him. He was very encouraging. So like I get that from him. So like there was like the musical aspect. There was like I want to serve people aspect. And that kind of just like came together to what I'm doing today.
Amazing, amazing. Jacinda, what do you think about everything that you just heard?
No, I think it's fantastic. I mean, to be able to take such, you hear a lot of testimonies from a lot of Christians about how ultimately there is a dark place that we come out of. And it's not until God shows us the truth in that situation, or at least we may have all these questions and we may not have the answer to them, but the idea that God gives you comfort in that. And so taking that, not knowing to, I trust in you and I'm going to keep on spreading the positivity that God gave me back into the local church, back into your local community. And so it's a beautiful story, and I'm thankful and for people like you and for sharing that, because it can be very inspiring to those who may be going through something very similar and not knowing what to do with such a tragedy in their life.
Yeah, there's a story in the Bible that talks about what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good.
That's good.
And so sometimes when we experience tragedy, the initial thought is, how could anything good come out of this?
Right.
How could the loss of a loved one, how could anything good come out of that? And I go back to my initial point, is that I can spend the rest of my life driving myself bananas, driving myself crazy, trying to figure out trying to get the answer of a finite situation to an infinite God.
Right.
Who I say with my mouth knows all, is all powerful, all knowing, omnipresent, but yet I can't trust him with a situation that I don't understand. That, again, that is where the healing, that is where the freedom, that is where the release, that is where the peace comes from.
Right.
And you don't really know what you believe until it's tested. It's easy to say this or say that, but when you're put to the fire, whenever a tragedy happens and you say to yourself, I can spend the rest of my life angry and bitter, or I can get better. And
That's right.
I can say, you know what, Dad, I'm going to carry on your legacy to my two sons who will never have the chance to meet you, but they'll meet you through me.
That's
And
right.
here's what's cool. So in my family lineage, I'm the last Miller. I'm the last male Miller to carry on the name. Well, I have a sister, and then there's me. I have two sons. So now my two sons will carry on my name.
That's right.
And they'll do greater things than I've ever done. But my dad was the first minister in our family.
Mm.
So now that changed the trajectory of our family lineage. Are
Right.
you with me?
Right. No, for
And
sure.
so that one decisions decide seasons. Decisions decide seasons. And so, like, my response to what happened was a determining factor in where I am today, where my sons are today. And so I hope that encourages some listeners and some viewers today.
Absolutely. Jared, tell me something. Was your dad also into music? Was he an artist? Was he a musician, singer?
So he was a singer. He didn't play an instrument, but my mom and dad both sang in the choir.
Ah, there it is. There it is.
And
How about your
and,
sons?
and so that's in their DNA. They're trying to deny it, but they got it. They got it. One's into sports and one's into martial arts, which is fantastic. But we're trying to get them to, I don't want to force it on them, but I definitely want to cultivate an environment in which they would at least try it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a question about your teenage years. A lot of times that's when we start to question our faith and ourselves, right? We really truly are trying to figure ourselves out. Did you have a period in your teenage years where you felt that way, where you were questioning faith and questioning who you are as a person?
Okay. I have a story about that, and I'm just going to get to it. But some people, when they hear it, are going to scratch their head and say, well, that's not really that big of a deal. And anyway, this is my story, so I have to kind of say what happened for me. Number one, I was surrounded by some great people in my life. That helps tremendously. I was heavily involved in my youth ministry. So, like, the majority of my influences were people in a godly environment. So some would say I was in a bubble. That's fine. But for me, it was protection, but I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. In fact, so because music was such a huge part of my life, again, this is going to sound kind of funny. There is nothing wrong with secular music. Let me give a little preface, okay, where I'm going. But for me, like, God was calling me to a place in my life of consecration and devotion, not legalism and not being judgmental, but for me personally, there was like a certain path I needed to take. And part of that was to watch my intake. movies, music, whatever, of influences that would pull me away from him versus pull me to him. And the reason why I say that is because for me, it was never like drugs or alcohol or sex or any of these things. For me, it was like, because there was a calling on my life and because music was such a huge part of my life, I was listening to certain types of secular music that were influencing me in the wrong way. It was affecting my attitude. It was affecting just so many areas of my life. And we know this, music is a powerful tool, right? Music affects things.
Absolutely.
It affects your mood. It affects your heartbeat. It affects your all these things, right? And it also affects your
That's right.
spirit. And so for me, I remember telling God, I was like, okay, if you're wanting me to take a season, see, back then we had a thing called CDs.
Yeah, okay, I had them too.
I still did too.
Yeah,
Yes, you still have it.
and cassette tapes. And I remember it was back then we had Sunday morning and Sunday night. I remember leaving church and coming home and bawling my eyes out and breaking all of my secular CDs. And again, some people say like, well, what's the big deal with that? Like, that's nothing. But for me, that was like my thing between me and God, that like I had to work that out because it was having an effect on me. So it's kind of like the person who never watches their diet until the doctor says, if you don't make a change in your diet, you're not going to live much longer. And then they have a reason to do it. Well, now they're going to eat broccoli and they hated broccoli. Well, for me, it was like there were certain Christian music that I couldn't stand because I thought it was cheesy or this or that. But I knew that for like my attitude and my spirit, I had to let go of some things and embrace some other things that I didn't necessarily like at first, but were good for my spirit. Does that make sense?
100%.
No, absolutely.
Makes total sense to me.
So all that to say is like, that's kind of the area that took me out of like a short season of rebellion in my teenage years and kind of got me back on track.
Makes sense. And I will tell you, for me, I was very similar, surrounded by people of faith. I'm what I call a cradle Catholic. So I was born into Catholicism,
Right.
practice Catholicism, very heavily involved in the church as well. And I did have some questioning of my faith, but that was at the tail end of my teenage years because I was becoming a nurse. So I went into nursing at 15 and I started to see things that really, usually you're not until you're a full-fledged adult, right? You wouldn't be looking at these things. You don't see people at their worst. You don't see people dying. AIDS, this was back in the 80s when I became a nurse. AIDS had just emerged, right? So seeing people dying and seeing a lot of the controversy that was surrounding HIV and AIDS and the conversations that were being had about that is what had me questioning faith because of the things that I was experiencing. So
Sure.
but I'm back, right? I had to make a pivot and come back, but I had to take those years to question who I was becoming and where my faith actually stood in regards to the healing of individuals and people. So, Jesse, I want to throw this question at you. In your perspective and with the people of your age range, how are you guys seeing things these days when it comes to that?
I think now more than ever, I don't know if you've seen it, but if you just look at the news or social media, we're in a culture that completely has no idea what anything means anymore. There's a complete cycle of redefining the truth, and now we can create our own truths. And so it's very hard these days to not question because everything's ever changing. And so, from my perspective, in my own experience, it for me, it was also in college, in my like late teens, early 20s early 20s that I had my own question of faith. But I eventually did find God in all of that craziness. And I look back and I see that story where God starts to wrestle with Jacob, and so this idea that we continually wrestle with what the truth is and wrestling with God, even though it is a wrestle and it is very confrontational. This is also the closest you're ever to Him. Like there's this relationship that you have with Him that you're so close and you're wrestling, yes, but you know, you're the closest you've ever been to him. And so for me, looking back, I see I was in a period of a lot of questions, too many questions, if anything, but I was able to get an answer. And it wasn't an answer that the world accepts, but it's an answer that gave me comfort. If that makes sense in the psychological
Yeah,
sense.
it's a process. Yeah, I
It
think
is.
it's a process that we all have to go through, right? As part of the process as we grow. Now, I know you have some questions for Jared.
Oh
What are
yeah, yeah. So,
mm,
well, since we've been talking about, you know, firstly, I wanted to say I read your book and I thought it was fantastic. Definitely loved how you partnered or had us partner with you discovering what the truth is and how you got to it and what is the truth. And so I wanted to know, since we are in a culture that keeps on redefining what the truth is, what made you want to join it and show the world, like, hey, I found what it is. What made you want to share your journey into finding that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. There was I call it a nugget or a thought, inspirational thought, hit me back in 2018. And the thought was the voices you trust determine the direction of your life. The voices you trust determine the direction of your life. If that's a father, a mother, you know, an aunt, uncle, a minister, I mean, a colleague, a coworker, a neighbor, whatever. The people who you trust the most influence you the most, and that influence shapes your reality of truth. And so for me, just like we said a minute ago, I mean, what is real news? What is fake news? You know, like how in the world do we decipher between like our neighborhoods and what's happening in Europe and what's happening in Africa and what's happening in Japan and what's happening in social media and what's happening in Michigan? Like it's bonkers. It's wild. It's crazy. And so for me, it's like, how do we find solid ground? I mean, because what happens is it's people's truth is either sinking sand or it's a rock and it's solid. And when life crumbles, the foundation that's actually the truth is going to stand. And so all those components really said, okay, I brought the idea to my publisher and he looked at me and said, Jared, you have a David size assignment in front of you, as
mm,
in like David and Goliath. And
yes.
he saw something in what I was presenting that I didn't even see. And he said, Jared, this message is so much bigger than you. God has just blessed you to be able to present it. He planted the seed inside of you and he trusted you to present it. Now you need to present it. And so for me, one of the strategies, and you read the book so you know, is instead of just from the shotgun, this is the truth. This is what you should believe. This is it. We take the reader through a journey to find it for themselves. And by the time we get to the conclusion of the book, even if the reader doesn't agree, at least they can say, I saw how he came to that. It's a solid argument or conclusion on how he came to that. And I tell people that if they're a believer or if they're not a believer, even if they read chapters 1 through 4, there's 5 chapters, 1 through 4, they're going to get a ton out of it. And so I think it's just so relative to the times that we're living in to ask the tough questions. And I want to say this I feel like this is really important, is that in a world where people like, this is my truth and that's your truth, and you believe what you want to believe, and I believe what I want to believe.
Hmm.
Like, God's not afraid of our questions. Like for so long with Catholicism or being a Protestant or whatever it is, like a lot of us, we trusted our parents, we trusted our upbringing. Yes, we tried to navigate our own path, but we kind of took on what we were raised to believe. Today's world is not like that at all. It's like everyone's questioning everything, but that's actually a good thing. That's a good thing because the Bible says, ask and you shall receive. Like, it's if you seek him, you'll find the truth. If you seek the truth, the problem is most people don't want the truth. They want a reassurance that what they believe is the truth.
Right.
And I'm going to go a step further. The word no is a curse word in society. No one wants to be told no. Translation, I don't want to be accountable to anyone but myself. Translation. I'm going to go there. Everyone wants to be their own God.
Mm.
Yeah.
What that means is they only want to answer to themselves because of a lack of trust, because of abuse in leadership, because of toxicity. There's a trust deficit. So they say to themselves, I know what's best for me, inadvertently more than God does. And so my encouragement is, hey, instead of taking that route, why don't you search? Why don't you seek? Because if you really surrender and really seek and search, you will find the truth for yourself. And when you find it, it's the most beautiful thing you'll ever find.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was a fantastic answer. Fantastic question. And I know some more questions that Jesse has. Jesse, I would like you to ask one more.
No, for sure. And so, it's so interesting that you started to talk about this piece that, the truth gives. And so, how would you encourage someone right now who might be listening to this and they want to find more of the truth? And like, how would you encourage them, like in this moment, wherever part of their life is, whether they're on the climax of whatever issue or trouble they're going, no matter if they're in their highest moment or their lowest moment, like how would you encourage them to start this? Like,
How would I encourage them to start their truth journey to
yeah,
find it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, okay, by and large, there's many things people look for in life, they search for in life. But if I was going to wrap it up in one word, what every human before us, present, and ever will be born, what every person is looking for above anything else is one word, and that word is peace. People desire and need peace. That's why you have, and I want to be respectful and careful now, that's why you have billionaires who commit suicide.
Mm.
They have the whole world, but they lost their soul. They have no peace.
Right.
And you cannot Cash App, Venmo, Zelle, PayPal peace. And this is why I say that the people who you trust the most influence you the most and shape your reality of truth. Because peace is not just a character trait, peace is a person.
Right.
And more is caught than taught. And so in the seeking and in the asking and the knocking, I would encourage if people are lost, they don't know where they are, and they feel discombobulated, and they feel like there's no direction in life, I would encourage them, okay, like breathing exercises and meditation, all these things are great, but like those are like the cousins of the dad. Like so many times we treat the symptoms, but we don't treat the root.
Mm-hmm.
We pick the fruit, but we don't study the root. And so I think for me, it's like, yeah, all those things are great, but what if you were just to sit in silence and just talk to God for yourself?
Right.
And even if someone doesn't identify or know who God is, ask the question. Reveal yourself to me. I want to know. Like, God's not afraid of our questions. And that's the thing, is that like there is a peace that transcends our intellect. There is a spiritual peace that transcends our body and our emotions. And there's a stillness. And that, my friends, is priceless. And that is what the world is desperately longing for. When you find that, you find truth.
that's totally
Amen.
right. That
Amen.
reminds me of the verse that everyone loves to quote it, but it really gives a perspective here. Uh, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives,
Right.
but as I give to you." And so I remind myself that all the time, that the peace the world offers, all the self-love and the self-help and all that's all nice and dandy, but that peace doesn't work. That doesn't satisfy me. Only his peace does.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's so good. And it's so true.
Amen. Absolutely. So let's start with a conversation, right? Have that conversation with God, have that conversation with yourself. Um, One of the questions that are other person who was supposed to be here, Kaylee, wanted me to ask you was which artist styles have influenced your songwriting and singing?
Gosh, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but that's okay. I would say, not that there's not great artists that are influencing me today, but there was a group back in the '90s, and that group was called DC Talk.
DC Talk, yes.
Yeah, and that group influenced me in my teenage years more than any other, vocally and stylistically with songwriting. And so that was, I mean, there's many others, but that was probably the greatest influence.
The greatest for you. Another question she has is what advice would you give songwriters going through writer's block when you're writing a song?
Collaboration. Like, few things can get you out of a rut quicker than sharing your idea with someone and then them adding their sauce to it, them adding their perspective. It's like, oh, I never thought about that before. Oh, well, what if you did this? Or what if you tried that? Or let's do this, or let's try that. You know what I mean? And so it just like, it kind of gets you out of that stale place that you're in. And the thing about art and being a creative is that we want things to be perfect. But if it's art, I think you just kind of, again, you have to surrender to the process and let it naturally unfold to what it's going to be. And stop trying to put it in a box. If it's a song, if it's a book, if it's a poem, whatever it is, that's what makes it art, right? Is the free flow to naturally manifest itself.
Absolutely. Be perfectly imperfect, right?
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
the saying says. So, Jesse, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Honestly, I think we really did cover a lot, and I'm just this whole conversation has been such a blessing to me, and I hope that a lot of people that are listening to this or just stumbled upon it really feel encouraged into finding the truth for themselves. And so I'm all good.
Amazing, great. So, Jared, tell everyone how they can get a hold of you. I have scrolling underneath, right? So jaredmillerofficial.com is your website, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And your social media, your Instagram and Facebook, the same thing, at Jared Miller Official, correct?
You got it. That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
And your book is available where?
So my book is available on my website, but also on Amazon. Search Jared Miller Truth. You'll find it. It's all there. And I would be greatly appreciative to all who pick it up.
As you heard, Jesse read it and absolutely loved it. So
thank you.
We encourage everybody to pick that book up and read and leave Jared a comment, right, on Amazon. Leave a review.
Absolutely.
So this is the last question that I always ask all of my guests, and that is, how do you define success?
What a great question. Here it is. All right. So it's three things. Knowing your purpose.
Perfect.
Knowing your purpose. Number two, growing to your maximum potential. There's so many people who pass on from this life and they still have a song in their heart. They still have a book that was never written. They still have an assignment to accomplish. So knowing your purpose, growing to your maximum potential, and then number three, sowing seeds that benefit others. If you know your purpose and you grow to your maximum potential and you stop, you sell yourself short. What is the whole purpose of you becoming all these great things is to pour out to other people.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. That you fill up to pour out. Yeah. And so I feel like
and leaving your legacy behind, right, Jared? Leaving
Absolutely.
something behind that says,
like
I was
dad.
here.
Yeah.
That's right. I was here. Jared,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Jesse, thank you.
No,
and
thank
everybody
you.
out there, I will see you next time.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabrielle Morales, and I am a recruitment coordinator for Be the Match. My journey with Be the Match actually began when I was only 9 years old. At that point, my 7-month-old baby sister was diagnosed with an extremely rare form of leukemia. Through the Be the Match registry, we were able to find a matching donor for my sister. And although a few months later we lost her, her cancer was cured. Our family is so thankful for the additional months that we had with my sister. And ever since then, I've made a promise to myself to dedicate my life to helping children just like Isabella and helping families like ours by continuing her legacy. Hence why I now work for Be the Match. I love what I do so much, and I'm able to spread awareness about the huge need for more donors on the registry, especially those of diverse backgrounds. There is currently a huge disparity within the registry for minority patients, and we need your help. It is so simple to save a life and to be put on the registry. You can visit izzyslegacy.com or text Izzy's Legacy to the number 61474 to start the registration process to be on the Be the Match registry, to hopefully be a life-saving match for a searching patient in need.